Hi, I'm Jay, and this is the AprilAire Model 700 Series 2 humidifier. There's a Series 1 and Series 2. We'll get into the differences a little bit later here. But we're going to figure out why this particular model does not have any water coming down the drain. We have the unit turned on, and it should be running. So no water coming down the drain, that means there's a problem. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to see if there's water here in the feed line, okay? Because we may not have water pressure there, even though the water's turned on. So we're going to disconnect this, but before we do that, we're going to have our assistant turn the water off. Find the saddle valve, turn it clockwise until it stops. Okay, now that the water's turned off, let's open this up and see what we have. You're going to use a 1/2 inch and a 9/16 inch wrench in order to get this apart. Let's take a bucket and move this line and stick it into the bucket. All right, now let's turn the water on. All right, as you can see, we have plenty of water pressure here. So we're good to this point. Let's turn the water off. All right, now, if when my assistant turned that valve on, we had no water here, the problem is the saddle valve. Those saddle valves are easy to replace. Just buy one from us and replace it. Now, this particular situation, we had plenty of water pressure here. Problem is not with the saddle valve. It's the solenoid valve or some other situation. So let's reconnect this and continue testing. And we're going to snug it up with the wrenches. All right, we still have the power and the water turned off. Now we're going to check the outbound side of the solenoid valve to see if there's water there, but it's just not getting into the humidifier. So we're going to go back down here and we're going to disconnect the feed tube. Same wrenches. All right, we have the feed tube disconnected. Let's get out a rag. We're going to hold it on this valve, okay? If things go right, we'll have water here. So what we're going to do is get the water turned back on and then turn the humidifier and the furnace back on so we can get this valve to open, or at least get electricity to it and see what happens. So let's have our assistant turn the water on, and then we're going to turn on the furnace and humidifier. Still nothing. Okay, so we have water on the inlet side of the solenoid valve. We have no water leaving the solenoid valve. So now the only thing left is to determine if there's electricity feeding the solenoid valve. If we had water when I was holding this rag on here, and there was water squirting out of the solenoid valve, then that would show that we were good up to this point on the valve. The problem then would have been right here. On the end of this feed tube, there's a tiny little orifice. It's a tiny little nylon piece about the size of a pencil eraser. And they will plug up over time, and sometimes they'll just erode and get to have a very large hole in them. There's a microscopic hole in this thing, and it is used to meter the amount of water that goes up to the pad, top of the pad, so that you have just enough to wet the pad and also a little bit left to wash the pad, and that's what goes down the drain. If this orifice plugs up, we'll have no water going up there. If the orifice completely disintegrates or the hole in it erodes too large, then you'll have too much water feeding up, in which case you'd have a flood of water coming down the drain. It should be trickling down the drain during normal operation. Let's get this line reconnected. snug this back up. Now let's test the solenoid valve itself. So turn the water back on, turn the furnace back on, and turn the humidifier on. And we're going to check to see if we have electricity here. There's a couple of ways of doing that. One of them is the easy way, and it involves taking a screwdriver, a non-magnetic screwdriver like this particular one here. So if I touch this to ductwork or a bolt or something, it doesn't stick to it, okay? So it's not a magnetic style screwdriver. We're going to just take this and we're going to touch it to the top of the solenoid valve. Now, this is an electromagnetic valve. So if it's getting electricity and this valve is trying to open, even though it's not, then there'll be magnetic power right here on the end. So we're going to take this and we're going to hold it here and we're going to check. Okay, now it wants to stick to the top of this valve. So we do have magnetism here, which means that the valve is getting electricity. If it were not getting power, again, we'd have nothing here. But because it wants to stick to the top of this valve, that is proving that there's electricity to the valve. The coil is generating an electromagnetic force, and the valve should be open. This valve is not open, so we've determined this valve is stuck internally. So the valve does need to be replaced. That's a simple job. Just buy the valve from us, stick a new valve in. Now, if we were to determine that we didn't feel any magnetic attraction here, then we want to check for voltage. We've turned off the power to our humidifier and furnace. So now what we're going to do is the alternate method of testing the solenoid valve to see if there's electricity feeding it. These two yellow wires that feed the solenoid valve are sending 24 volts to it. So we're going to get out some wire cutters, cut these one at a time. Strip the ends. We're going to take about a half an inch off of each end. Let's twist the ends. Now we're going to twist them together. We're going to reconnect them. So here's this one. So one from the solenoid valve and one to the humidifier. We're going to twist this together. All right, now that they're reconnected, we're going to get a voltmeter, attach it to this, and test for electricity. All right, here's our voltmeter. We're going to attach the probes carefully, one at a time. There's that one, and the second one. All right, so we have these connected. You want to be careful that these are not touching the sheet metal or anything, that they're not grounded out and they're not shorted out to each other. So these are freely hanging. Now, we're going to have our assistant turn the furnace back on and the humidifier back on so that we can see if we have electricity here. Okay, now we have the probes connected to our wires. The humidifier is turned on, the furnace is turned on, everything should be running right now. And we do have electricity. So as you can see, the voltage is ranging between 19 and 29 volts. That's normal. We have AC power feeding the valve. Our solenoid valve should be open at this point. And as you can see, we have no water coming down our drain. So the valve is stuck closed, even though it's getting electricity. This is the alternate way of testing it if you cannot use your screwdriver magnet trick on your particular model. So we have power, valve on open, we have a bad solenoid valve. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that this was a model 700 Series 2. The difference between the 700 Series 1 and Series 2 is this. If you look up inside of this little grill, you will find that the Series 2 has a little relay like this in it. The Series 1 units had a circuit board like this. little relay with a transformer built onto it. Now, the powered humidifiers up until recently all had a system like this in it with a built-in transformer and relay, like the 110s, the 112s, 760s, 768s. They were set up like this. Now, they work differently than this, which is the Series 2. The way they worked is, since they had a built-in transformer, you could take these two wires and touch them together in the old series. If you touched them together and you had electricity coming to the humidifier from this plug-in wire, the humidifier would come on, so it was kind of easier to test. But they did away with that. So nowadays, since they have this little relay in them, you can't touch these two wires together, because if you do, you're going to blow out something, and probably the transformer down at the other end here inside the furnace. So it's important that you know if it's a Series 1 or Series 2 when doing any kind of testing to determine if either one of these two devices, which is hiding inside of this particular humidifier, is faulty. If you get in trouble and you're trying to figure that out, you can call us for technical support on that. There's typically not problems with those two items, so it's not a real common issue. But if you run into a problem like that where you have no electricity here feeding this solenoid valve and you're confused as to what to do next, you can give us a call and we'll try to walk you through it. The other thing that I have not mentioned earlier is to make sure that this cord is plugged into a live outlet. Easy button for that is to go to that outlet, unplug the humidifier, plug something in like a lamp or a radio just to see if that thing comes on, just to make sure 100% positive that you do have power going to this socket that this is plugged into. So on this particular one, we've determined that there's an issue here, and we were going to test about regarding the voltage here. So in the case where you had no voltage here feeding the solenoid valve, there was another kind of a test that you can do, and that is to listen for the fan inside this thing to see if it runs. So if you listen real carefully and you turn this unit on, now you can't really see the fan inside of here spinning, but if you listen very carefully while the furnace is running and you have an assistant turning the humidistat up and down, up and down, up and down, and the humidistat's clicking on and off, oftentimes you can listen and hear inside of this thing, you'll hear the humidifier itself making a little clicking noise on and off. And also, sometimes you can hear the fan, depending upon how quiet your furnace is, you can actually hear this fan inside of here spinning. So that's another way to determine that the humidistat and everything else is working up to this point. And once you know all that's working and you still don't have the solenoid valve opening and closing, even though you don't have, maybe you don't have a way to test this, you don't have any meter, a voltmeter to test this with. But if you know that the fan inside of this thing is coming on and off, on and off, on and off with the humidistat, well, then you know you have power here, and the real problem, the solenoid valve. Thanks for watching. For additional help or questions, feel free to contact us.